Going to talk about Ghana's deal with the IMF. Welcome to GTV Breakfast. I am Thelma Taki, and thank you for all your amazing wishes for me yesterday for my birthday. I'm very, very grateful. This morning we are talking money issues, and we know the Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, yesterday granted approval for Ghana's $3 billion bailout aimed at revitalizing the country's ailing economy. The decision follows the Executive Board's meeting after Ghana's receipt of financing assurances from the Paris Club. Today, the International Monetary Fund will hold a virtual press conference at 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. to give further details on the outcome of the IMF Executive Board meeting on Ghana's bailout request. On the scoop this morning, we are joined by the Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, to explain what this means for our economy. Good morning, Doc. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
And before you start off the conversation, Doc, we want to educate our viewers on a few of the technical details when it comes to this IMF deals. How is it that countries come to require assistance from that institution, and what's the process for getting an agreement? At the screen, I'll be taking you through a few of those items. How do crises occur is the question that we are asking. Why does it occur? So we've been told time and over a few times that Ghana went to the IMF for a couple of reasons, and those will be coming at the screens now. So domestic factors, and these include inappropriate fiscal and monetary policies which can lead to large current account and fiscal deficits and high public debt levels. The exchange rate fixed at an inappropriate rate can also be one of the factors that account for countries needing to go to the IMF so that they can get some competitive advantage, and which can result in some of the reserves being boosted. So inappropriate exchange rates can erode competitiveness and result in the loss of official revenues, and a weak financial system can also create economic booms and busts. So political instability and weak institutions can also trigger crises, and all these things can lead a country to be so further down that it might require assistance in order to survive. And so we are taking you through why crises occur and how they affect countries' financial standings, which would require them to get some help from the IMF. This is a few of them. The next one we've heard several times: external factors, and they include shocks ranging from natural disasters to large swings in the commodity prices. They are common causes of crisis, and especially if you are a low-income country, you are more susceptible to external factors which are likely to shock the economy. So with globalization and sudden changes in market sentiment, that can also result in capital flow volatility, and even countries with sound fundamentals can be severely affected by economic crisis and policies elsewhere. So if you remember correctly, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had even the top world countries, the top ranging, financial callers of the world, the great names that you know of, the US, the UK, Germany, the G20, the G7, and all these great countries, they've all suffered consequences of these external factors, especially when it comes to COVID-19. So external factors are a factor. In Ghana, we've heard external factors being mentioned as one of the reasons for the economy being in the state that it's in. And of course, COVID-19 has been one of the items that the government has highlighted as one of the reasons. The other thing we've heard is also the Russia-Ukraine war and its effect on trade across the globe. Specifically when it comes to some of our agricultural products, we know that most of the wheat in the world comes from that region of Ukraine and Russia and that enclave. And we also know that fertilizer, for example, also is largely from that side of the world, and this has affected prices on our own market. So when we talk about some of the external shocks, that is what we mean. So of course, COVID-19 pandemic is an example of an external shock affecting countries across the globe, and the IMF responded with unprecedented financial assistance to help countries protect the most vulnerable and set the stage for economic recovery. So those are the details that you should keep in mind about why crisis situations happen to occur sometimes across the world. So COVID has brought with it its own crisis and opportunities, according to some, because now the IMF is dipping its hands deeper into its pockets to bail countries out. Now, let's take you through some of the lending processes. When a country decides to go to the IMF, what does that country do? So the first thing is you request for help. So you always ask for help from the IMF. It's always the first way to go. If you have not asked for help, the IMF will not interfere. It will just sit and observe what you decide to do. Once you have asked for help, the country's government and the IMF staff will now discuss the economic and financial situation and also talk about the financing needs. So you ask the IMF for help and they'll ask you, what do you need? What are in your books? What are your books saying? And that's where you found that in times past, the staff of the IMF came to Ghana, sat with people from the finance ministry to go through Ghana's books. So we've also gone through that stage already. Stage 3 of the lending process is that typically a country's government and the IMF will agree on a program of economic policies before the IMF lends to the country. And in most cases, a country's commitments to undertake certain policy actions known as policy conditionality are an integral part of IMF lending. So at that table, when they sit to discuss, some agreement would be made. How are you intending to raise your own domestic sources of revenue? And so you would remember that in times past, we've seen the Ministry of Finance urging people with the domestic debt exchange program to come on board and help government to raise the monies that it needs. We've seen an introduction of some taxes. All that is towards raising the revenues that we need so that when the IMF decides to release the funds, we would be in a better position to say, we have this to offer and we need this more to support the budget. I'm hoping that you're following with this argument. So on point 4, once the terms are agreed upon, the policy program underlying an arrangement is presented to the IMF's executive board in a letter of intent and detailed in a memorandum of understanding. The IMF staff makes a recommendation to the executive board to endorse the country's policy intentions and offer financing. This process can be expedited under the IMF's emergency financing mechanism. So we've also been at this stage. The Ministry of Finance has written that letter of intent. The staff of IMF have gone through Ghana's proposal and they've recommended that Ghana should get the monies because we showed good faith by implementing our own policies that proved to them that we are also willing to put something on the table. So we've gone through that stage as well. And now we are approaching where we are now. Point 5, after its executive board approves a loan, the IMF monitors how members implement the policy actions underpinning it. And a country's return to economic and financial health ensures that IMF funds are repaid so that they can be made available to other member countries. So this is the ideal situation. We are hoping that once the monies hit the account with the approval that we've been signaled has been given, Ghana can now begin to implement the policies that it has told the board that it would do. So at 2 p.m. today, the IMF will be having that conference. Stay with GTV and GBC News. I'm sure that will bring you all the details when that happens. At the table is the Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance, at the Finance Ministry, and it's Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. He'll be explaining to us what this process has been like so far for the country. Good morning, Doc, and thank you once again for joining us.
Good
so
morning.
It hasn't been smooth sailing for Ghana to get this approval from the IMF. Initially, there were even doubts that we would qualify for the funds at all. But now that you are here, what's the package that we are receiving? Explain that package to us clearly.
Well, thank you very much. As you know, we went to the IMF with a program, and the program is called PCPEC, Post-COVID-19 Program for Economic Growth. And that is the program the IMF board has approved. And in approving the program, they approved to grant us a facility, a loan, a concessional loan, which is zero interest, and also a grace period of about 5.5 years, and the repayment of about 10 years. That's very concessional.
Grace period of 5.5 years.
5.5 years.
It means, in effect, that for the next 5 years, we will not be paying any part of the loan.
Yes.
And after the 5 years have gone by,
then we'll repay
in 10 years.
In 10 years. And it's also zero interest. And so the cost of this loan will not be onerous on our debt profile. and so it's very concessional. It is a $3 billion loan, and it's going to be disbursed in tranches. The first 600 million of this is going to be disbursed once the program has been approved. It was approved yesterday, and so we are expecting that within 1 week, the first $600 million will come through the Bank of Ghana. There will be a second tranche in November, December, once we go through the first review successfully. And then after that amount will be 600 million as well. So for this year, you are expecting about 1.2 billion United States dollars. The first 600 million is going to be disbursed now, and then another 600 million dollars by November, December. Then you have another balance, which will be disbursed in equal tranches every 6 months. $360 million after a successful review, which means that the IMF will review our performance, the extent to which we are implementing the measures we have agreed to pursue. And based on a successful review, they will disburse every 6 months $360 million. So this is the package in short.
So we know, we've been told, and I took viewers through some of the reasons why countries find themselves at the doors of the IMF asking for help. And we've been told many times what our own issues were. Where in the negotiations was the government compelled to admit the reasons for us being at the door of the IMF? And what reasons did we tell them that brought us to that?
Well, I mean, a number of reasons. Some of them external factors and some domestic. And so a combination of external factors and domestic factors led us to this point. For example, we were doing very well. Growth was good. Inflation was low. The exchange rate in the city was very stable. Then COVID struck the whole world, COVID-19. And during that period, Ghana suffered greatly. We suffered in terms of revenue shortfall. The revenue we had projected for the year had fallen by about 13.4 billion Ghana cedis, which means that we had budgeted to collect revenue by a certain amount, and we fell short by 13.4 billion cedis. Then at the same time, expenditure increased, in order to make the necessary interventions to save lives. And that also led to additional expenditure of about 11 billion cedis. So for COVID alone, the net fiscal effect, if you like, you add 13.4 to 11 billion. And that tells you how much it cost us in terms of the fiscal impact on the revenue side and also on the expenditure side. We spent some money also on paying IPP debts. IPP is the independent power producers, particularly contracts that were signed, which led to what we call excess capacity payments. Generation capacity we did not use, and yet we had to pay for them because these contracts had what we call take or pay provisions. Whether you use the power or not, you have to pay. That also accumulated more than 11 billion cedis. Then you also had the FinSec, the financial sector cleanup, which we had to spend over 20 billion cedis as well. And so the combined effect of all this affected our budget, leading to a budget deficit of about 14.7% by the end of 2020. And so this affected our finances. And because of this deficit, we had to finance, we had to borrow. And this also took our debt levels, debt to GDP, from 61.2% to 74.4% by the end of 2020. And so if you borrow that much, then it took you to what we call unsustainable debt levels. And that is one major reason you have to go to the IMF in order to improve on your debt levels to sustainable levels. Just when we were recovering, then the Russia-Ukraine war also started. And you rightly said earlier that food prices went up, because of fertilizer shortage. Also, petroleum prices also went up because Russia is the second largest producer of oil. And logistical challenges led to the prices of goods around the world increasing significantly. So inflation was an issue. And you know, many countries, including the advanced countries, their central bank decided to contain inflation. And to contain inflation, they use monetary policy tightening, which means they were increasing their interest rates. Now, when you increase the interest rate to contain inflation, what it means is that those who are investing in our country now found investment in their own countries attractive. And so we suffered capital reversal. People started withdrawing their investment to invest in their own countries. So this led to capital shortage. And by capital shortage, it means that forex, which was coming to our economy, was no longer coming. And those that invested were withdrawing. And so it led to the cedi becoming weaker and weaker. So the cedi depreciated significantly. And so that's another reason you want to go to the IMF, so that you can get support to shore up the value of your local currency through what we call balance of payment support. And then our international reserves also suffered because we were sending out money, but we're not receiving as much as we should have in terms of forex. So that also reduced our international reserves from about $6.1 billion to $2.6 billion. And that's another reason you go to the IMF, in order to receive balance of payment support. But the deficit side, which continues to be an issue for us, is so critical that in negotiating this IMF program, we negotiated for budget support. In other words, we want the money to meet our financing gap, budget financing gap, so that we can carry out the programs in the budget, the projects we have programmed to undertake, so we can improve on the living conditions of the people of Ghana.
Is it worrying to you, sir, that it appears that unless there is a guard looking at what we are doing, unless there's a policeman at the traffic light, the Okada man just rides through with his motorbike? Is it worrying for you that unless someone else is telling us how to spend our money and making sure we spend it that way, we do not make the gains that we want to see in the economy?
Well, I think that the Ghana is part of the IMF. We are a member of the IMF, and we seek help when we have challenges. You know, we get bilateral support, we get grants, they are all support. But no country will give you free lunch. They will give you the support, but they also want to see you improve in the way you do things. And so it is not surprising that the IMF will want to see us do things. Particularly for this program, it is our own program. We have developed this program and submitted to the IMF about how we want to improve our revenue, how we want to control our expenditure. Now they are giving us the support, but they want to hold us to it, you know. But there is a time this program will end, and we hope that we can learn lessons and to be able to sustain the gains that we will make and never go back to the days of crisis.
I'm asking this because even in Africa, in West Africa, where we pride ourselves on being a leader on many fronts, how many West African countries are before the IMF now? So it suggests to some that it is because we have not prudently managed the resources that were entrusted to us,
I mean, you can say
even with
this
the opportunities that COVID presented. Because in COVID, we got opportunities, including monies coming in from our neighbors, our global neighbors, to help us out.
Yes, but all didn't come through grants. Some actually came in as loan. And that is why I said that when you had that huge deficit, you had to finance it through borrowing. Okay, and so you had a combination of loans and also grant support. But that, again, is not enough, because we still continue to have a deficit, and we have to finance the deficit. But, you know, you can't say this only for West Africa. Even countries in Latin America, in Europe, there are countries that have sought IMF support, you know. And so it is not peculiar to West Africa. Every country faces challenges. And you know that, particularly for COVID, it affected every country. And that is why the central banks of many countries, including advanced countries, were using monetary tightening to contain their inflation. We saw long queues of vehicles looking for petrol in Britain. We saw in the US shops that were empty, they were not goods, you know. And so it is not particularly for West Africa. It affects every country. And that is why when you have those challenges, you try to put your house in order. That will require some bitter fiscal adjustment. And that is what we are trying to do through the IMF program.
Could we have better managed the resources, Doc?
Well,
because when you look at some of the reports, for example, the Auditor General's report, highlighting where a lot of the lapses are and the places where we need to plug holes so that the ship does not take on more water. Do you think we could have managed the finances a bit better?
Well, I think that there can always be improvement. I mean, there is no doubt about that. We are a developing country. We want to aspire to become a developed country. So there can always be improvement in the way we manage our finances. But that is not to say that we are not achieving successes. I'll give you an example in the area of revenue performance. Our revenue, tax revenue to GDP used to be around 12%, even 2-3 years ago. Today, it is around 15%, and we are seeking to increase it to 18.7% by 2026 under the IMF program. So we are talking some successes. But as a developing country, we have more problems, and we have to take them one after the other. Most of the problems we face is trying to address all your challenges at a go. And that is why sometimes expenditure is so high, and then you are recording deficit. But why not? A developing country, you cannot wait for one problem to be solved before you go to the next problem. And so you have to bear with us.
When we talk about cutting the size of government, some people think that we need fewer government appointees, especially ministerial ones, and even positions like yours, Minister of State at the Ministry of Finance. We have a Minister for Finance. What does a Minister of State in charge of the Ministry of Finance do?
Well, unless you come into the ministry, you certainly will not appreciate the work we do in the ministry. So I invite you one day to see my normal day. And
so what's a day for you like?
We can't sit here and talk about what my day is like. But I've always said that sometimes we are a bit unrealistic about the question you asked. Because
about
when you
asking for government to reduce the sizes?
When you say reducing government, what are you talking about? What is the appropriate size? And so I have asked questions, for example, should we benchmark it to the size of our budget, for example? Okay. Should we benchmark it to the size of our GDP, for example? And so it's difficult when you say, let's reduce government size. What is the appropriate size? Nobody has answered that question. And so these are issues we have to discuss as a country, in order to agree on what the benchmarks should be on determining what is the appropriate size of government. Otherwise, we are all just playing to the gallery.
How different are your duties on the day-to-day from that of the Minister of Finance?
I mean, I can sit here and tell you my duties.
I just want to understand,
for
the purpose of those who argue that we have a Minister for Finance, for example, do we need a Minister of State in charge at the Ministry of Finance? We have a Minister for other sectors. Do we need a Minister of State in charge of that ministry? I just want you to make us understand why perhaps you feel or the government feels that those two roles are equally important and needed at the same time.
Well, if you want me to indulge you, I support the Minister for Finance in his work. The finance ministry is the heart of the country. It's carrying the entire country on its head. And you think that the minister doesn't need support from other political appointees?
He has
deputies. He needs that support.
And there are the technocrats that work at the Ministry of Finance.
Some ministries even had 3 deputies. The Ministry of Finance has 2 deputies and 1 Minister of State. Okay? And the Ministry of Finance is the heart. So let's not belabor the point.
I was asking a curious one, but more specifically to the IMF funds, you're saying that now that the approval is about to be given when the IMF addresses the media this afternoon from Washington, D.C., the first tranche is likely to hit our accounts perhaps in a week.
Yeah.
Where are the immediate priority areas for the government?
Well, the program has already been approved. It was approved yesterday. Okay, the press conference, I believe, is just to highlight the issues relating to the program. But as far as the objectives of the program are concerned, fiscal stability, macro fiscal stability is key. We need to be able to improve on our macroeconomic fundamentals because that is what you need to attract investment. If your macro is not good, you may not be able to build the confidence that investors need to come and invest.
Break down macro for
Macro, yes. So inflation, for example, our inflation rate reached 54% by the end of 2022. Today, it is 41%. We want it to go down further until we achieve a single digit. So inflation is number one.
We have a single digit target?
Yes, we'll get to a single digit. We have achieved single digits before. I'm sure you know the history. So it is possible. We can do that and do better. Interest rates also need to be looked at. Our interest rate, 91T Treasury bill rate, reached 35.5%. The year before it was 12.5%. And so we want to be able to bring it down as well. So inflation, interest rate, then also the city, the stability of the city. We want the city to be strengthened. Already, since the announcement that Ghana got financing assurances, the city has been gaining against other currencies.
Is that worrying, though, that the city only does better when the dollar is around? Does the city get its lifeblood from the dollar?
Unfortunately, Bloomberg has just reported that for those who think like what you have just said, over the last 6 months, Ghana's cedi has been the best performing currency against 150 currencies in the world. We had not announced the coming of the dollar when that happened. So it's not only when the dollar is coming around that the cedi improves. Over the last 6 months, against 150 currencies, the cedi has been the best performing currency. And so we want to be able to stabilize the cedi. So these are the macro fundamentals you want to look at. And then also to be able to increase your international reserves. When you have these fundamentals, then the confidence in every investor is boosted and they will come and invest in our economy.
So you've talked about macro.
Apart from the macro fiscal targets that we want to achieve, we're also looking at structural reforms. As I said earlier, we are a developing country. And we continue to be faced with development challenges. We need to change the way we do some of our things. We need to be able to improve on revenue collection. And so GRA has to be changed into a very efficient tax collection institution. And you know that they are embarking on a number of digital initiatives. The EVAT program is being pursued. We want to improve upon it. And so we want to collect more revenue than we are collecting under the program. And the program, the strategy we want to use requires some changes in the way we collect our taxes. So that's a structural reform. We want to be able to reduce expenditure from 26% by the end of 2022 in terms of expenditure to GDP to 23% by 2026. And government has already announced a number of measures in the 2023 budget that we want to use to be able to rationalize expenditure and through that reduce expenditure. We want to be able to invest more in the social investment area of our economy. And here the IMF program in particular is different from other programs because whilst with other programs people were concerned about the impact on the poor and the vulnerable, in this particular IMF program we are focusing also on investment that will support the poor. The LEAP, for example, we are doubling the expenditure on LEAP. School feeding program, we are doubling expenditure on school feeding program. NHIS is also being given serious attention. In fact, the IMF program that has just been approved has given certain ceiling in terms of expenditure ceiling that we have to spend on this social intervention. These are the interventions that would directly affect the poor. School feeding is going to get better. NHIS is going to get better. The other point, LEAP, is going to get better. And so it is not a program that will come and hurt the poor. We are very sensitive to the plight of the poor, and that has been negotiated in this program.
Free SHS?
Yeah, free SHS is all going to get better. Some people had speculated that with the coming of the IMF program, free SHS is going to be stopped. It is not stopping. It's a major transformative program of our government, and it is one of the best areas to redistribute resources in our country in order for every part of the country to benefit. So you have structural reforms, then you have macro fiscals, but there are also going to be monetary policies, flexible exchange rate policies, so that we can address the problems associated with the depreciation of the cedi, the local currency. So these are some of the objectives that we want to achieve under the program. But at the end of it all, we also want to achieve debt sustainability. And by debt sustainability, our debt levels are very high. I've already explained the reasons for which we had to borrow to finance our deficit. We want to bring the debt levels down. But not only debt levels, to sustainable levels of about 55% of GDP in net present value terms, from 103% in net present value terms of GDP as of the end of 2022. But also, we want to reduce debt service. Debt service as a percentage of revenue has to be reduced to about 18%. What it means is that if you are not servicing debt, then the money you would have used to service the debt, you use it to spend on the social interventions and other critical infrastructure projects that the government is embarking on.
I've heard arguments at this table that government needs to get into more revenue generating ventures and focus more on those as against going into social interventions, provision of social interventions, because they do not bring us any returns. Is there a focus to move towards the more business side of government, to make sure that government is investing in issues, is investing in industry, is investing in manufacturing in a way that it makes money, as against spending money, for example, on things that do not bring money back to the government, paying salaries, school feeding, because those are expenses that go and nothing comes back into the government coffers. I've heard that argument at the table. Is this something that has come up in any of the discussions at the ministry?
Of course, there's a saying that government does not do business, and so you are not likely to see government investing in infrastructure, in manufacturing. What government will do is to invest in infrastructure that supports manufacturing. What government will do is to invest in creating an environment that unleashes the growth potential of the economy through the private sector. What government will do is to set the macro framework that boosts the confidence of the investor to want to bring their own money and invest and be assured of returns, reasonable returns for their investment. That's what government will do. But government is also interested in ensuring that we have social order, and that is why government will invest in the social interventions. So government doesn't do business. Government provides the enabling environment for businesses to thrive, and therefore we will spend the money that we are getting through the budget. That's another difference that I need to emphasize. Previously, IMF programs will come to support balance of payment position of the government. This particular one is for budget support. Budget support means that we are going to use it to finance the budget financing gap, to finance the road infrastructure we need to build, to finance educational infrastructure, health infrastructure. That is what we are going to use the money to. But at the same time, we will achieve the objective of balance of payment support, because the money is coming in dollars to the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana will then give cedi, the cedi equivalent, to the government. And so you are receiving money for budget support, but at the same time you are building the international reserve position of the government, of the Bank of Ghana, in order to ensure that the cedi becomes stronger and create the environment we need to support the private sector growth.
So $600 million in a week, another $600 million in December, and thereafter $360 million every 6 months. Are there any milestones? Are there any targets that we need to hit at every point? Because you talked about they will look at where we are, what we've done with what we've been given so far, and then we are given the next tranche. So what targets are we hoping to meet from next week until December, when we expect the next 600 million?
Of course, there are targets that we have to meet. Our own program, the post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, has targets that we have to achieve. The IMF program has also provided targets that we have, what we call structural benchmarks, for example. And I was just talking about the revenue performance. You want to increase revenue collection as a share of GDP from 15% to 18%. Expenditure rationalization. You want to reduce expenditure as a share of GDP from 26% to 23%. These are some of the targets that we have to meet. So we have structural benchmarks, we have quantitative performance benchmarks. We have indicative targets that we have to meet. So there are about 50 of the structural reforms that we have to be able to undertake at certain time intervals. And if you don't achieve them when the IMF is doing a review, it means that there will not be disbursement.
I want to know what some of those targets are. So, for example, for the next 6 months from now until December, what would the IMF want to see happening with our economy with the monies that they are spending? I want you to highlight one or two of the targets for me so that we all keep an eye on those. And then come December, we can have a conversation and say, have we achieved them?
Well, for example, I'll just give you one of the indicative targets because there are a host of targets that we have to achieve. Non-oil public revenue. Non-oil public revenue. There is a floor, cumulative floor, that's the ceiling, which we have to achieve. Next year, it should be 49 million, actually 49 billion cedis. Then by December, it should be 49 cedis. By next year, May, it should be 79 billion cedis. So this is just one example of what we are supposed to achieve in terms of the non-oil public revenue. Social spending, cumulative floor. By December, we should have spent 2 billion cedis. By May next year, 3 billion cedis. So these are, again, targets that we have to achieve. And so this will have to be monitored when the IMF comes in for review. And then if we are successful with the reviews, then they do the next tranche of disbursement. So that is what is going to be the feature of the program over the next three years.
So over the next 3 years, we'll be getting these monies coming in periodically.
Yes.
For the next 5 years, we are not paying anything for it.
5.5 years. That's a grace period.
Years.
Yes.
We will pay this over
10 years.
A 10-year period after that.
Yes.
What is it costing us beyond the money? What conditionalities were set for this? We've been taken through the e-levy. We've been taken through the introduction of new taxes. The COVID-19 levy, the 1% is still there. VAT has gone up. What more is this going to cost us?
Well, I mean, if you talk about conditionalities, it is the targets we are talking about. That's what other people will call conditionalities. And so if the program says that we should spend 2 billion, a minimum of 2 billion cedis on social intervention, for example, that is a conditionality, so-called. But others will call it a target, indicative target that you have to meet. Now, is it a bad idea to spend a minimum of 2 billion on the poor, particularly for school feeding program? Is it a bad idea? And so when people talk about conditionalities, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is cost. It's going to affect us. No.
So
it is what we have,
are not always negative?
No, they are not always negative. What we have agreed to do with the fund through our PCPEG program, is what are the conditionalities. Most of them actually defined by us, because we have to tell the IMF our program, what we want to do, and then they support us, and then they hold us to it. That's what people call conditionalities. So conditionalities are not always, as you said, negative.
Should we expect any more taxes being
introduced? What we're trying to do, we already have introduced some tax measures through the tax bills Parliament passed. We want to improve on collection. Collection will mean that incentivizing the machinery, the structure for collection, introducing digitalization and other reforms that will ensure that GRA becomes a very efficient tax institution. So we want to focus on those areas as well, such as the EVAT, e-levy. We are looking at e-levy. I mean, you know that we are not achieving the target that we want to for e-levy. So we want to improve upon it with reforms so that we can collect more, not increase the rate, but ensure that we collect more through other efforts that we need to embark on.
Some people say now that we are getting money, can we take off the 1% COVID-19 levy? Is that still being collected? The WHO has already declared it, that the pandemic is over. So are we going to see the COVID-19, the 1% being taken off the tax list?
The pandemic is over, but the effect of the pandemic will remain with us for some time. I mean, we had to borrow so much to finance it, and I gave you the statistics. You had a revenue shortfall of 13.4 billion. You had additional expenditure of 11 billion. You know, the debt that we accumulated as a result of COVID interventions, we have to pay. Okay? And so the effects will continue to be with us. And that is what we need to be able to address through the taxes that we collect.
I've heard suggestions from some quarters that perhaps it's time to put the benefits before the people and tell people that this is a COVID levy initiative. So people know that 1% went towards putting this structure here, just like we had at the time of HIPIC. Mm-hmm. And so you come to a school, you realize that school was put there because of the HIPIC funds that were that were procured. Is that something that you would want to look at? Because people ask, now COVID levy, what do they use the COVID levy for?
So you want us to also label VAT?
Is that
projects funded at your
table? Is that something you
projects funded with VAT money? We should label that as VAT projects, like HIPIC projects, COVID tax projects.
I've heard those suggestions.
Yeah, but it is not every suggestion that you want to do. Those that you think will help transform our economy, will help benefit the people. Yes, we will do it. Labeling is not necessarily an issue we should quarrel over.
So small businesses are always the ones who, call on government to create the enabling environment. With this new money that's coming in, what's in it for small businesses and what's in it for the investor community as well? Because we work side by side. In the private sector, it's the small businesses, it's also the investors. What's in it for that group of people?
I mean, small businesses suffer most when the macroeconomy is bad, because they have to go and borrow at higher interest, higher cost of borrowing. When inflation, is very high, they suffer. And so by trying to achieve macro stability, you are creating an environment for small businesses to grow. Secondly, we want to use the program money to support the budget. And I told you some of the projects we want to do. Some will certainly go to support small business. The Ghana Enterprise Agency, for example, they are benefiting through the Obatampa project, the Ghana Cares Obatampa project. Maslock is allocated some money through the budget. And so the budget support we're talking about means that the important critical programs of the budget will be financed. The challenges we would have gotten in terms of the revenue we needed to finance these projects, this money will come in to complement what we are collecting from the taxes and other grants. But let me add that there is what we call a catalytic effect of the program. And by this I mean that the program is going to come along with additional support from other multilaterals and other bilateral, and investor confidence is going to be boosted, and so investors will come in and invest in our economy. For example, we are almost concluding negotiation with the World Bank for another $900 million US dollars.
Another loan.
900 million, yes, US dollars, as a consequence of the IMF program. And this will be disbursed in 3 tranches of $300 million every year for 3 years. That is also coming into the budget. It's coming to support the budget. Then the IMF, the World Bank is further supporting what we call the Ghana Financial Sector Stability Fund, which we want to use to support the domestic banking industry. And it's supporting with 250 million. Africa Development Bank is also supporting with up to 100 million US dollars. And we are far advanced in negotiation. So all this support will come in addition to what the IMF is going to disburse.
So those
are that's the catalytic
alternative
effect.
sources of funding.
Yes.
But they are all loans.
Yes, they're all loans. Why not? Even though we want to reduce our loan level, our debt levels, there are some loans that are concessional, very concessional, and that's what we want to encourage. If you go for a concessional loan, the cost to your debt is lower in some cases negligible compared to going to the capital market to borrow at rates on the market.
Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam is a Minister of State at the Presidency at the Ministry of Finance, and he is our guest at the table. I'll be taking your messages now on our WhatsApp number 055 5561034, and keep them short and crisp so that we can get as many of them as we can. So, sir, if you will take note of some of the issues that you would want to respond to when we get to you, then we'll take some of those responses. My question to the minister: is the country director of IMF in Ghana a supporting staff of your ministry or your spending officer? Congratulations, your government, and the most welcome news that Ghana is at the IMF. Alhaji Dauda from Medina State. So is the country director a supporting staff of your ministry or your spending officer is the question. The government has been preaching family planning to its citizens even before the Fourth Republic, telling parents to give birth to the number of children they can cater for and space their beds appropriately. That, in a way, is telling citizens to live within their means. A government that cannot pay its debts, trainees, allowances, NAPCO salaries and contractors, yet defends why it has to cut down its size. Why do we need 3 deputies at the ministry while other governments under the same ministry had just one? The system where people beg for power and once gained, lord themselves over those who gave them power must stop. Hashtag let's wise up. So those are his thoughts there. In fact, my heart is so grieved and saddened this morning. Is that how far Galamsey is eating us up? Both leadership and the ordinary citizens should take the fight against Galamsey serious. Master Planner Junior from King Tampo. Good morning, Thelma. Please, can you find out details of how we are going to pay back and how much interest it will come with? So Doc has talked to us about how we are paying this back. Interest, he will reiterate the point for us once again. Good morning, BFS Thelma and Doctor. And I admire the way Doctor is answering your questions in plain, simple English for the understanding of even me, a common man. He has been this simple in his explanation, hardworking since our school days. I pray he's made Finance Minister, inshallah. So Piero is sending us this message from Nungwa. Are you eyeing Mr. Foriata's job? Good morning, Thelma. Why are you asking a man we pay with taxpayers' money to tell us why he does what he does and he's reluctant to say? The only signal to that is he does nothing. Ghana deserves better. Dr. Anointing sent that message. What's the difference between the 2 bottles on the table? So we have some Galamsey water from River Pra, taken at different times of the year, one last year, one more recently. And so these are the messages on this matter that we are discussing. And I'll come to you, Doc, so you have some responses and answers for us based on what you've listened to from our viewers.
So the last one, what he does is nothing. So what I'm sitting here doing and explaining government policies, I don't think that is nothing. That means a lot. Providing information for him to ask questions on. That is what we mean by accountability, isn't it? And so if you don't do something, you cannot account for it. But that is on the lighter side. The question about the country's director being of the IMF being our supporting staff, he's the staff of the IMF. Just
so we
as
are not paying him.
No, how can we pay the staff of the IMF? We cannot. IMF recruited him, and they pay him, and he's here to ensure that the IMF interest and their work is done. There is a question about the repayment, which I talked about already, 10 years after 5.5 years of grace period, and the interest rate is 0. So these are the questions I picked. Okay.
Doc, I'll take your final comments before we wrap this IMF program. Expectations are high that the funds coming at the time they are would really help us to meet the targets that we've set for ourselves, which the IMF has approved of. What are the assurances? Because we've heard many assurances before that these funds will not be used, in a way that will bring the country further down the economic ladder. We want to see Ghana grow to a certain level. Can we be assured at all that they will be put to those uses? Some people say they will have Kenke party, they will buy themselves V8s, and they will, fly their family members abroad and have all the good time while the masses suffer. that may not be true because some people say that there are things to show for the monies that we've borrowed. What assurances can you give us, and why should we believe those assurances?
Well, I think it is important for us to remember that even before the external shocks that afflicted our economy happened, this economy was doing very well. Growth was around 7%. Inflation had reached a single digit. The cedi was stable. And our international reserves was about 4.5 months of import cover. The economy was doing well. It means that we were investing the money well. We had created an enabling environment for growth to take place in the economy. And so you can be assured that this government will spend this money in a very productive manner. We will spend this money in critical infrastructure. We will invest this money in social interventions and ensure that we protect everybody within our society and create the foundation to further grow our economy to sustainable levels. We will do that. And this is why we are here accounting to you how we are going to spend that money. And I can assure you that the documents relating to the IMF program have already been published. We want the citizens of Ghana to continue to scrutinize these documents and to continue to hold us accountable so that we all can work together to ensure that
where
the
can
money
we get the
is spent
documents
well.
online?
They are online, the IMF website and also the Ministry of Finance website. But my conclusion is also to appeal to everybody. This is not just about the government. It is about our country. We have to own the challenges of our country, and we have to work together as a country to address this. Citizens also have their responsibility. Whilst government is working to increase revenue and also to cut expenditure, citizens have responsibility to pay taxes. We have to pay the taxes. We don't have to evade taxes. Light bill, we have to pay. Water bill, we have to pay. We don't have to throw rubbish in the streets, in the gutters, because you will have to use money to clean the gutters when we do that. So we all have our responsibility as citizens to complement the work of our government so that together we all can make the sacrifices required to develop our country and put it on the path to sustainability.
Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, Dr. Mohammed Adam, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you come back very, very soon.
I want to come back.
We've been talking about the IMF approval, which happened yesterday, granting government's request for $3 billion, a bailout aimed at revitalizing the country's ailing economy. Dr. Adam has been explaining to us what the future holds for the country now that the monies are about to be dispersed. He's told us about some of the plans and will keep monitoring the situation. And of course, we'll keep you posted, bring you on the journey towards economic recovery. This is GTV Breakfast. We'll take a quick break. When we return, there will be more to discuss.
You need to ask yourself,